What indications is the president getting from Putin that he wants to have this meeting with Zelensky soon?
Because he spoke to him directly yesterday.
And he expressed that sooner rather than later.
He spoke to that directly yesterday, and the president put that in his statement that he gave to all of you, the news media, knowing you'd be asking following that conversation in the effort of transparency.
The White House says the arrangements for a face-to-face meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin are underway. But there's been no word directly from Russia that Putin has said yes. Joining us now, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and senior fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center, Ivo Daalder, and foreign policy editor-in-chief and host of FP Live, Ravi Aggarwal. So Caroline Leavitt, Ivo, seemed to be confused as to why anybody would ask a question about Vladimir Putin's intentions. Donald Trump spoke to him, and he said yes, and that was enough. Is that enough?
No, it's not even clear that that Putin said yes to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump may have believed that's what he said. But every indication we're getting from Moscow, including the statement on the actual phone call, omitted any mention of Vladimir Putin sitting down with Volodymyr Zelensky. And that's not a surprise, because after all, Vladimir Putin has never wanted to sit down with Volodymyr Zelensky. He has not been willing to do so for many, many years, certainly not even before the war. So this idea that somehow the two of them are going to sit down just because the president of the United States would like him to, I think has always been far-fetched. And we're finding now that how far-fetched it may prove to be.
So we played it a little bit earlier, but I'm sure you've heard the hot mic moment, Ivo, that Donald Trump had talking to the French president, saying that as crazy as it sounds, Vladimir Putin wants to make a deal for him, for me, he says. Is that crazy to say?
It's not crazy to say for Donald Trump. It's just crazy to think that that's true when it comes to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin isn't in this situation because he wants to do something nice for Donald Trump. He started a war because he wants to revisit the entire post-Cold War settlement, which led to the end of the Soviet Union, led to the end of Moscow's influence not over the former countries of the Soviet Union, but indeed over Central and Eastern Europe. And that's what this war is about. Those are the root causes that President Putin keeps talking about, including in the press availability in Alaska, standing next to President Trump. Nothing has changed with regard to Vladimir Putin's goals. He wants to subjugate Ukraine. He wants to push NATO further west and out of the Central and Eastern Europe. That's always been his goal. And as long as he thinks he can achieve it by force of arms, he's going to continue to do that.
Ravi, Donald Trump has said that there will be security guarantees. He hasn't been clear on them for Ukraine. Can Ukraine trust Donald Trump on his word for that?
No, not at all. I mean, the idea of security guarantees was always there, and it was always a question of what are the specifics. So without any specifics around what that means, why Zelensky should trust places, countries, people who have all betrayed Ukraine before. I mean, we're all familiar with agreements in the past, whether it's the Minsk agreement or further back into history. Ukraine feels very hard done by, and it really needs something tangible to be able to trust any sort of deal that's made. But, one of the things that I keep coming back to is the reality on the ground is that we don't have a ceasefire. And Putin has very cleverly over the last few days managed to change the conversation to things that are basically going to get locked into technicalities and will allow him to kick the can down the road basically indefinitely while he is still killing Ukrainians in Ukraine and still bombing the country.
Was the meeting yesterday with the 7 European leaders, European Commission, NATO, and a number of heads of state, along with Zelensky and President Donald Trump, was it a successful meeting? Ravi?
It could have been worse. I think the fact that all of them showed up in force in a unified way was smart because Trump respects force. He respects people ganging up together. That makes them bigger. It makes it harder for him to bully any one of them. All of that was smart. But in terms of what we've actually gotten out of this, we are not much further along than we were 6 months ago or a year ago. I think the only ray of light here is that the longer this drags on and the more Trump realizes that Putin is expertly playing him like a kid on this whole thing in public, on live television, again and again and again, that maybe that stiffens Trump's spine and maybe it makes him think about all of this differently than he has so far.
Ivo, Donald Trump keeps talking about himself as a peacemaker. He's touting ending 6 wars. I cover Donald Trump every day. What exactly is he talking about?
Oh, I did a piece in Politico the other day, sort of going through his 6 wars, most of which are either negotiated by other people or indeed ceasefires, which, again, yesterday in the Oval Office said, oh, no, I don't negotiate ceasefires. I negotiate ends to war. Well, as far as I can tell, the ending of the war between India and Pakistan, or at least the strikes, is a ceasefire. The underlying conflict has not been resolved. The same is true between Cambodia and Thailand. The same is true between Israel and Iran. Those are 3 of the 6 conflicts that he likes to tout as having, quote, solved. He hadn't solved any of them. And by the way, nobody was elected president in order to solve the conflict between Rwanda and the DRC. He said he was going to solve the conflicts that really mattered: Ukraine, even before inauguration, and Gaza as soon as as well before inauguration. Of course, on both of those, the situation has gotten worse. There's been twice as much bombing of Ukrainian cities since Donald Trump has been president as compared to before. And in Gaza, we're facing the largest humanitarian crisis, man-made humanitarian crisis in the world, except for perhaps Sudan. Both places are continuing. So the idea that Donald Trump is a peacemaker is something that he and his supporters like to talk about, but so far, very little evidence to underscore.
Maybe he's a ceasefire helper. We can put it that way. Ravi,
Sure,
getting a
that'd be good.
ceasefire, getting a ceasefire with Vladimir Putin, though. I mean, is that enough?
No,
Yeah,
but it would be an important starting point if he actually did that, was able to do that in Ukraine. I just don't think Putin wants to go there. And I don't think the way to go there is to fate him, is to clap him at his arrival in Alaska. I think the strategy is all wrong. But I do want to say one more thing here to add to Ivo's excellent points. Not only is Trump's claim of solving 6 conflicts in 6 months wrong, it has actually made things a lot worse. So Trump claims that he solved the crisis between India and Pakistan. Let's be clear, India denies that Trump had any role in this. And that disagreement between New Delhi and Washington is ruining what had been one of the most important relationships for the United States, especially as it looks at China as its primary adversary in the 21st century. So America's just lost its biggest ally in Asia. And that's a huge own goal on Trump's part. And in many senses, we talk a lot about the Middle East and Europe. This might be one of his biggest foreign policy mistakes.